The United States is currently engaged in a war in Iran, nearly 6,000 miles away from its own borders. To maintain an offensive on this scale, the military must move an immense volume of hardware, fuel, and personnel across the globe around the clock. That logistical bridge relies on one specific piece of real estate, Naval Air Station Sigonella. Located in the center of the Mediterranean on the Italian island of Sicily, it serves as a critical stepping stone linking the U.S. to the Middle East. Recently, a fleet of U.S. military aircraft, including heavy payload B-52 bombers, took off from the United States. Their mission required a scheduled pit stop at Sigonella to refuel before continuing to the conflict zone. While those bombers were still over the Atlantic, the Italian government issued a firm mid-air denial of access. The planes were ordered not to land on Italian soil. This forced those bombers to scramble for alternatives, but the logistical friction was only the beginning. The incident triggered a diplomatic chain reaction that reached the highest levels of government in Washington, Rome, and Madrid. The rejection stems from the specific legal status of the base. While the U.S. military has a heavy presence at Sigonella, they do not own the facility. Italy is the sovereign landlord, and the U.S. military operates there as a tenant. Under 1950s treaties, routine logistical flights are permitted, but active combat operations or weapons transit require formal authorization from the Italian parliament. In this instance, the U.S. military requested landing authorization only after the bombers were airborne, bypassing the mandatory consultation window. This put Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni in a difficult position. She has maintained a record of close cooperation and ideological alignment with the U.S. president, but domestic pressure is mounting. Public opinion is sharply critical of the Iran conflict, with protesters regularly gathering outside U.S. installations to voice opposition. Because the U.S. skipped the required notification window, Meloni could not approve the landing without circumventing her own parliament. To maintain her governing coalition, she chose to enforce the letter of the treaty. The decision shows that in a volatile political climate, a failure to follow bureaucratic protocol forces a host nation to assert its sovereignty by pushing back against its partners. Italy's denial was the climax of a broader effort by European allies to distance themselves from the American war effort. Spain went further, closing its airspace to U.S. military aircraft. France similarly refused to allow resupply flights, creating a geographic wall. This blockade forces the U.S. military into a logistical scramble, requiring long reroutes and heavy reliance on mid-air refueling over neutral or hostile territories. The unified defiance from these close allies has left the U.S. military geographically and diplomatically isolated from its usual network of support. Inside the Pentagon, this blockade is viewed as an unforgivable betrayal by partners who are usually the first to provide support. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth addressed the crisis with a public ultimatum directed at America's European partners. Hegseth questioned the future of the NATO alliance, suggesting that if allies refuse to provide basing and overflight, the United States may choose not to honor the collective defense principles of Article 5. President Trump followed this with a retaliatory policy shift, announcing that the U.S. will wind down its operations in Iran within a matter of weeks, regardless of whether a final deal is reached. Trump's message to Europe was direct. If the Strait of Hormuz remains closed because of the ongoing conflict, the U.S. Navy will no longer be responsible for securing Europe's oil supply. This threat forces Europe to immediately consider the economic and physical costs of a world without the American military umbrella. The incident at Sigonella and the subsequent response from Washington have stripped away the assumption of automatic protection. In its place is a transactional framework where an ally's safety is tied directly to their support for U.S. military objectives.